My name's Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, and welcome to another broadcast of AccessTV.org, where you will be getting the undisputed truth. I'm Charles Barrow. I'm serving as your host today. We're going to continue our discussion on our series on redlining and gentrification. My guest today is Professor Albert Dichiara, Professor of Criminology at the University of Hartford. Welcome to the show, Doc.
Thank you, Charles.
Let's get right into it. There's been a lot of ink on the subject of redlining and gentrification. For example, Gayle King did a story on it back in the 80s when she was with WFSB. I did a study, a research study entitled Who's Zoning Who in the 80s. Aaron Boggs has done some extensive writing on it. The Washington Post did a story called A World Apart, talking about the 06120 zip code, which is the North Hartford. Professor Robert Cotto from Trinity did an interview with Susan Campbell from WNPR. And then, of course, the most compelling study was the one that Professor Jack Dowdy and his colleagues did at Trinity College called On the Line, How Housing, Schooling, and Civil Rights Shape Hartford and the Suburbs. Now, redlining. Somebody characterized it as a government-sanctioned slavery project targeted to neighborhoods of color, people of color. I don't dispute that because of the conditions that exist today. Now, we've been knowing each other for quite some time. I mean, we probably combined have done 100 years of work in communities of color. My question to you, Professor, is this. Is redlining and gentrification a crime?
Well, there are dimensions to redlining, Charles. There is the idea of segregating certain communities for profit to lower the property values to make them more affordable. There is racist redlining, which is obvious in its own definition that the space in the city itself is being managed through the use of redlining, through these practices. So now in my field, we have a concept called state crime. These are social harms. These are things that harm people, and but they're not officially listed as crimes, because the people who define what crime is in the law are the people who are perpetrating these crimes. Mm-hmm. And this is usually done with from the perspective of a very broad interest. It's not a matter of attacking minorities or any particular neighborhood. It's about what would be called the greater good. Okay, and I think that's at the heart of Hartford here, is that the city and its leadership, both elected and unelected, has a long history of shaping the city to meet their needs, and of pushing people who are not necessary to meet that vision out of the picture. So the classic example is the East End in Hartford, the old Front Street area, where when certain people decided they wanted that area as a new gateway to the city with a beautiful plaza, they just pushed the Italians and other people who were living there out. So you could in fact say that redlining is a state crime. It is a social harm that is not defined in law as a crime, but by redlining a neighborhood, you are depriving people of education, of a community of a particular lifestyle of employment. So while the process is basically labeled as benign, this is for the greater good, the impact on individuals, on families, is negative, and therefore they are victimized.
Okay. So you're saying that people who have historically been pushed into conditions of abject poverty are not victims of what we say would be a crime. It was just what they're just a victim of association. They're a victim of placement.
They're a victim of circumstances that the city, in its wisdom, has decided that this area would be better suited for. Let's take the highway, Interstate 84 here, that the neighborhoods that existed underneath the viaduct were viewed as more suitable for holding up that road than they were for people having homes and businesses. So if you go down Capitol Avenue underneath that overpass, think that used to be a neighborhood. There used to be stores there and people meeting and forming community. And that is the crime. So you destroyed a neighborhood, you destroyed a community, and you don't have to take any blame, because the thinking would be, well, obviously we need a highway. And obviously we need to put it there. These are not obvious things. These are political choices that people make. And the people who are being pushed out are powerless people.
Right, right.
And they're being pushed out by powerful people. Self-interest is not a bad thing. Everyone should be motivated by self-interest. But some people have no power to exercise their self-interest, and they're the ones who are pushed away.
And to piggyback on what you said about, Capitol Avenue and the highway, of course, they built the highway for, to separate certain neighborhoods as well. And then another example is what they used to call the bottom, Windsor Street. Now, my thinking is that, that was a flourishing neighborhood, the Cotton Club area per se. And I guess the people who were trying to, control, the standard of living, what have you, in that area probably figured out that one day the people who lived on Windsor Street would utilize the railroad for commercial purposes and, of course, economic development. So what did they do? They got rid of it, just like you said. And then they built a monstrosity called Constitution Plaza, which is was a complete failure because of what's going on there now.
Just about Constitution Plaza, I got a kick out of this because when I first moved to Hartford in 1990, I drove in on the bridge and I took that exit, and I saw it was a fancy plaza with no people, no human activity there unless it was in the buildings. And I said, well, this is kind of a strange thing that you'd have right there in the gateway to the city, this desert. And then I did some thinking on it. I said, well, aren't these the same people who financed and supplied the Vietnam War? That's the thinking of these people. I mean, the business, the financial insurance companies financed this war. United Technologies and all those other companies, they benefited from that war. And so the people who thought that war was a good idea, the people who thought Constitution Plaza was a good idea, and I think they were wrong in both cases.
Well, obviously, because now I guess the occupants of Constitution Plaza are, city offices, and the people who are kind of like driving the engine now to the city. where do we go from here? I mean, like we can't sit up here and start pointing fingers because nobody's going to take the blame. Okay, you can't prosecute anybody because nobody's going to take the blame. Where do we go from here? You have a community like North Hartford, which is one of the top 5 poorest neighborhoods in the country by design. And of course, Clay Hill, a little enclave in North Hartford, is one of the poorest historical neighborhoods in the country. So where do we go from here, Doc?
I don't know. I mean, I wish I had the answer, but my research on this indicates that this is a pattern that's happening all over America, especially in medium-sized cities where the corporate and the civic infrastructure is leaving. I mean, Hartford was built in a way to make it easier for people to get in and get out. And this is mostly the white middle class. So, you can go to that area in East Hartford where that interchange is, and it's been pointed out by people that area, where that interchange in East Hartford, which is right on the river, is larger than downtown Hartford. So we've devoted a whole bunch of space to cars. 46,000 parking spots in Hartford. This city was built by people who did not have any interest in the people living here. And I think there needs to be some understanding of that this was designed for other people, by other people, for other purposes than African Americans having a community. I talk to people, and one of the things I've learned about in Hartford among the North End residents is that they want 2 things. They want to be part of the city, but they want their culture. They want to have their neighborhoods run their way. They want their schools run their way. They want some acknowledgement that they are valued and important people, and they want to have control over that. So by understanding the processes that tore the city apart, globalization, neoliberalism, the destruction of the social safety net, those things have to be understood. And then from there, you can figure out why the problems exist. What problems am I talking about? First is the problem of crime. No jobs, you're going to get a lot of crime. Okay, we have the problem in the schools. So many students are disinterested in school, not because they don't want to learn, but because no one in school is like them. None of their teachers are Puerto Rican. None of their teachers are African American. I was at Quirk Middle School in the inside suspension room for 4 years doing a research project, and I had at least more than one student tell me, you're the first white person who's ever spoken nicely to me.
Yeah.
And so this is what happens. Okay, when the money leaves, and when the civic leadership leaves, poor people who have nothing to draw on except for their goodwill and their intelligence have to fend for themselves. And we see that's just not enough. We need money here.
Okay. Good points. Now, redlining has been going on for about 100 years. I thought it was 80, but then when I viewed Professor Robert Cotto's interview with Susan Campbell from WNPR, he indicated that it's been going on for 100 years. Okay, so you have 100 years of redlining. Now you got this new phenomena called gentrification. Okay, so now they keep people in abject poverty in the inner city, in urban America, and now they want to ship them out to the plantations, like out in Suffield, Granby, Berlin. They want to put up the toll booths and say, you people, what do you want over here? You got everything you need over here. You can't afford anything on this side of the river or this side of the toll booth. So just get in your bicycle or your skateboard or your roller skates and shuffle on back over to where we put you. All right. Now, is that a crime or is it not a crime? So you got redlining for 100 years, and now you have this influx of gentrification.
Yeah, I think you're right that gentrification is just a new term for an old idea. But I think it really gets back to the point that the people who created this city after the Civil War, when industrialization made it one of the wealthiest cities in America, in the world, the presumption was that white people would run the city. So, and this is no knock on the current mayor because I don't know him. He seems like he's trying his best to do a good job. But when Aetna and all the big corporations left the city and took their leadership away, which may have been a good thing in the long run, took their money away, they left the city to minorities. And so we had a series of minority mayors and minority-dominated city council groups.
Board of Education.
Yes, but they had no money to work with.
Exactly.
And so then it becomes, well, I guess you need us white people to run a city, because, Eddie Perez couldn't do it, Pedro couldn't do it, Carrie Saxon Perry couldn't do it, Thurman Miller couldn't do it, because they were working with nothing.
Nothing.
The tax
Right,
base is
exactly.
gone.
Right.
There's no employment here. And so now we have a new regime coming in that, as you point out, seems to have connections to a broader political power structure. Governor Malloy and Bruin being linked and whatnot. That's something to be examined. But the point I think I would make is that when you decide to gentrify a community, what you really are saying, and I think this is probably not a 100% perfect analogy or analysis, it's white power, it's white supremacy. We're going to move white people into these neighborhoods because they are better suited to make this city what it can be, because African Americans are unemployed, they're unemployable because of criminal records, and they cannot be counted on to develop the foundation of a community that will function. So you want to bring in, and we've seen this since they started putting the apartments downtown in the 90s.
Right.
We're going to bring college students in. We're going to bring young professionals in. And young professionals and college students are minorities. Okay, we're not saying that. But the point is that the neighborhoods, the residents and neighbors, people who've been there 3 and 4 generations, they're being kicked out. And they're the ones who are being insulted, that you can't do this, so we'll have to do it for you.
Right. And, we had a little discussion before we got on air about the fact that the United States is probably gravitating to an apartheid form of government, like the old South Africa, where, well, you have it here. You got it here in Hartford now. You got, you have a European mayor running a brown city, okay? This pattern is going on all over the United States because I'm doing a national research project on this subject of redlining. And so this thing was all orchestrated because, like they tell you, when you're sleeping, somebody's creeping and trying to make you have a bad day.
But we make a mistake if we make this only about race or ethnicity. It's also a social class factor here. And so I was always appalled at this man named Herman Cain, who, an African-American man, very, very wealthy, very successful, and his crowning achievement in life was to make sure that people who worked in restaurants, waiters and waitresses, got that very low minimum wage of $2 an hour,
Exactly, yeah.
So here is a
for his bottom line.
Yeah, so this is a class issue. And we have a term in my field called intersectionality, okay, where class and race intersect at a certain way, okay? Race and class and sexual orientation work that way too. And we did see during the AIDS crisis, the early part of the AIDS crisis, that there was, if two same-sex people were trying to rent an apartment, they would be denied. So there's redlining for racial segregation purposes, but there's other forms of redlining out there. There's anti-gay redlining, okay? There's redlining against people with children in some places. They can't have children living there. So this pattern of exclusion is more than just race, okay? And it's because the people who are running our governments, to a large extent, are either disconnected from ordinary people to a large extent, or are incapable of doing anything for them because the money in politics keeps them away from that kind of thing.
Okay, let me piggyback on something that you just said. There's been test cases about same-sex oriented people trying to get an apartment back in the 80s or late 70s. A friend of mine and his female counterpart tried to rent an apartment in a certain part of the city, the West End, and they were turned down for whatever reason, who knows. But it's just part of the landscape. this whole system has been orchestrated to get to where we are today. And it's going to continue to be that way until somebody has the intestinal fortitude to say, look, you know, we got to put a stop to this. Now, the train already left the station, all right, in terms of the redlining and what benefits the puppeteers got out of it. Now we have this new wave thing with the gentrification process coming into society as becoming almost institutionalized, just like redlining. So, I mean, like, where do we go from here? I mean, like, the train's already left the station. People are being, you know, separated out of society. They'll be invisible again. They'll be back on the plantation. And you know, and then beat goes on.
Well, you know, Charles, I'll say that people have to organize. People have to take control of their neighborhoods, and that maybe is one of the big problems in this city, is that we do have this kind of fortress neighborhood mentality where Upper Albany and Clay Arsenal are the same.
We have a fragmented culture in the city of Hartford, and you know, we've been working on public safety initiatives for 25 years, and what did we find out? Oh, well, we don't want you people from the suburbs telling us what to do. But they tell us that. But if you get a person from Clay Hill and Upper Albany say to do something together, they hate each other. So they can't get anything done.
You and I sat on a group where we were looking at the route that this vacuum was going to take to clean Albany Avenue.
The Mac Vac.
Yes, and it was sponsored by an Upper Albany organization, and it stopped at the line where Clay Hill
stopped right there at Clay Hill,
right.
Magnolia and Albany.
Yes, exactly.
Right there. And like, you know,
I couldn't understand it. You know, I know you got very angry.
The gatekeeper of that project up in Upper Albany, she's still, you know, operating.
Yes. And you know, this is no knock on these folks. They have jobs.
Well,
they have constituencies to deal with.
Well,
they're
taking their marching orders from somebody as well.
But my point would be is that there's a fortress mentality with these neighborhoods, because I think, and I don't know, I may be wrong on this, but the at-large city council makes it hard for any one neighborhood to have an advocate to fight. You know, and so there's always this battle over a small pot.
That's why they do the redistricting. You know, they implemented the strong mayor form of government when Eddie Perez came in, who's a good friend of mine. They don't have district representation. You know, Clay Hill, okay, they now have representation on city council that took them maybe 40 years or so since Dominic DeLuca was mayor. You know, Clay Hill finally has representation on city council. Now, how effective she's going to be, that's going to be up to the puppeteers. I'm cautiously optimistic. Don't get me wrong. You know, I like these young guns coming in, you know, doing their thing in government. But, you know, the pot is empty, whether it be, you know, you gave mention to the fact that Thurman, Kerry, Pedro, and Eddie had no money. Well, this young guy, Luke, I mean, city's broke. You know, he's up against it as well. Even though he's connected to, you know, some powerful people in Washington, because of course his, you know, his background and resume, Rhodes Scholar, working in the Obama administration, working in Daniel Malloy's administration. You know, he's well connected, but, you know, the city is still broke. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see throughout his term how he's going to be able to turn things around. Now, granted, it wasn't a good start with this Dunkin' Donuts Park thing. I mean, that in itself, that project was the stake in the heart of North Hartford. And guess what? They built it at the Red Line, Trumbull and Maine. Sitting dormant now because of the long-term thinking of whoever did the bond package and whoever's responsible for that fiasco.
Well, I mean, that's just it. I mean, this is a system where you do need bonds, and there are agencies that manage these things. And putting up a supermarket in the North End is not as good from their perspective than a baseball stadium. All the evidence shows that sports stadiums do not do any good for any communities. They're just a drain on resources. But it looks nice. And again, think about this. What was that stadium designed to do? Bring people into the city. Who are we going to bring into the city? The people in the suburbs. Who's going to work there selling hot dogs and sweeping the carpets? It's going to be the North End residents. Yeah. So the game is played in a way where certain people are always going to lose.
But see, you see, I'm from New Britain, so the building of that stadium is a little sensitive to me because of the way they did our mayor, Aaron Stewart. Okay, these backroom deals and what have you. So we lost the Rock Cats, and we got the Yard Goat. You guys, well, the people in Hartford got the Yard Goats. Okay, I was talking to a gentleman yesterday evening, and he was saying, people are not as dumb as the puppeteers think they are. He says to me, he says, yeah, they built this stadium with bond money and private financing, and now the project is sitting dormant, and now they're going to want the taxpayers, us, to bail them out. That was a good analogy because it's, well, we'll see.
Well, typically that's what happens. The taxpayers do bail out these folks. Now, this is not a matter of a billionaire saying, I need a new stadium or else I'll move my team, as this guy in Milwaukee did, where the state put in many, many billions of dollars to build a stadium for the basketball team while just destroying the university system, sucking all kinds of money from the university system. This is a situation where you had empty lots, that something had to be done there. And the thing that would have revitalized that neighborhood, I don't know what it is not a baseball stadium, which has limited, I mean, what is going to happen to that baseball stadium in February, in December? That is space that, if we're planned differently, could be used year-round for all kinds of things,
exactly. Yeah.
And again, how many jobs is that going to create for the residents? Now, there's the front office jobs. Those are already taken by this organization. There's jobs in terms of who's going to manage the concessions. Those are corporate issues. These are contracts. But to flip a hamburger, to clean a bathroom, to take a ticket, that's the jobs you're talking about. You cannot raise a family, and you cannot rebuild a community on a ticket taker's income.
And it's kind of an irony that you would say that, because you got these kids out here working in the Dunkin' Donuts, the Paneras, the Burger Kings, and all 2 or 3 jobs in that industry, and they feel that, oh, I'm doing good. This is like, it's not a way of life. It's like, it's a part-time job. But,
yeah, I mean, you could survive working at Burger King.
But can you?
But life is more than survival. A single man in Hartford could probably, manage on a Burger King salary, okay, working as a clerk there.
So what is he going to be living in, a single room occupancy?
Exactly. Okay.
And but they don't have single room occupancies anymore. That's why they got rid of the Hartford Hotel.
One of the things I noticed, and I don't know where this information is, and I remember it, but I can't cite it. That Hartford has one of the highest percentages of unmarried men living alone of any city in America. Now you think about this. What does an unmarried man living alone do after work? He probably hits the bar, okay? He doesn't have to answer to a wife and children. So the family stabilizes a person's life. We know this from criminological research. A man who loves his wife and respects her and builds his life around that relationship and has kids is less likely, because of less time, to commit crime. But if you're a single guy with a job, you have money, 4 o'clock, let's go to the bar, let's have some drinks. You got a few drinks in you. Next thing, let's buy a line of Coke. Let's go find some women. Next thing you know, it's 11:30 at night, and you're struggling home. So that is not the kind of lifestyle that's going to sustain a community, although you could live that way, okay? And I think the thinking is that, well, if you can survive, then you can settle for that, and that's just not inappropriate in a lot of ways. To
you know,
wish that on someone.
we live in a different world now. I can guarantee you, if I went out here, you know, for 20 minutes and asked 20 people, when the last time you sat down and had dinner with your kids, you already know what answer I would get, right? I don't even know where my kids are, number one. You know?
Right. I mean, the world has changed, and dinner time no longer exists as you and I knew it when we were growing up, okay? But that's just one meal. I mean, there are ways to bond and to be with your family that don't have to be locked into these old-style, traditional ways of doing things, okay? Look, just like jobs, you know, I have a job where I'm not in at 8 in the morning and out at 5. I sometimes go in at 10, sometimes I go in at 8, sometimes I'm home at 3, sometimes I'm home at 9, okay? So we have a different world, obviously. And, but we have, if you have resources, and that means everything. Because when you have resources, you can make plans.
Right.
And when you can make plans, you can have hope. And you can build on that, you see? So if you're surviving, you're taking home, you know, $200 a week, yeah, you'll survive, okay? But that's not the point of how communities operate.
Keep hope alive.
Yeah, right. Well, so this is not a Hartford problem. This is a problem of lots of medium-sized cities where and look at Hartford again. The suburbs were developed under the auspices of federal loan systems.
FHA, yeah.
Right. That were preferentially given to veterans and to white people, basically. Okay? The idea is to move things out into the suburbs, build roads to accommodate those lifestyles, and people can drive into the city. And I think I read where 74% of the people who work in Hartford do not live in Hartford.
Oh, absolutely. The dollar does not travel one way into the city. They get their commuter buses, and they take the money out.
And look what we've done in this city. It's a city of parking lots.
Absolutely.
You know, it accommodate, you know, metal boxes so people can go back and live their real life in the suburbs. Your life in Hartford doesn't matter. And people who do work in Hartford, who live in Hartford, make very little money.
Right.
So this is something that is a systemic problem in the capitalist system as it's developing in the beginning of the 21st century. It's a new world, and globalization, not just of jobs but also of finance, of money, is just sucking this city dry.
Yeah, the New World Order, the New World Order. Well,
and globalization, Charles, is not an. And I was listening to President Obama. He was talking about globalization as if it's an inevitable development in human history. It is not. These are specific choices that people make. A businessman chooses to move to the suburbs. A company chooses to move to a different country. Okay? That can be changed. That can be altered. You can do things to control that.
Yeah, you're talking about the outsourcing of America.
Yeah.
The Lou Dobbs, the outsourcing of America.
Well, I don't know how much of Lou Dobbs I accept, but yeah. He's a little bit of a nut if you ask me, so.
Again, we've been having this discussion with Professor Professor Albert Dichiara from the University of Hartford Criminology Department. Doc, you know, this discussion is going to, to be continued. And as I said before, we can't point fingers at anybody because nobody's going to admit to, all the things that they've done. So you and I, while we're still breathing, can just continue to educate the people. Hope they get themselves out of the doldrums of what this system has put them into.
Yes.
I always like to talk about the Maxwell House syndrome. You drink your Maxwell House coffee in the morning. You kiss your kids goodbye. You get on the highway and get in the traffic jam. You're all stressed out. You go to the job. Your boss says, you know what? You come back home in a traffic jam. You sit down and maybe do a little homework with your kids. You know, when the kids go to bed, you have 3 glasses of wine with your wife. You know, then you go to sleep and do it all over again. Then you have 2 weeks vacation. You max out all your credit cards. Okay, you work 40 years, and then 6 months after you retire, you die. That's the nature of the beast.
No, welcome to the world.
Yeah. Okay, our listening audience, thank you for listening to another broadcast of accesstv.org, where you're going to get the undisputed truth. And we thank you for listening, and we'll see you the next time.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I do business as Light Source Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.